Now, back when I was a lot younger, I used to believe that, quite honestly, let and let live. You do you, I'll do me, that we could kind of just coexist and get along. That's what I used to believe. I used to believe that, most people at the end of the day were rational and they weren't going to harm anybody. And you know what? If their lifestyle, their choices didn't hurt me, then really, what was the big deal? I don't believe that anymore. Because I've come to realize that every decision, every choice, every action taken has consequences. And as we've seen, everything is a slippery slope. And the Overton window we're living through now, there's been so much fundamental change. Well, obviously, the big one these days is the whole trans movement. And people say, well, you know what? Hey, if this person identifies as this, really, what's the big deal? I had this discussion with a young man recently, and it started with the whole guise of same-sex marriage, and we kind of just evolved. And I said to him this, I said, I will tell you that within 10 years, you will be able to marry somebody, a 40, 50, 60-year-old man will be able to marry a 12-year-old. And he said, well, that's insane. How could that possible? That's not going to happen. I said, yeah, it will. Because what will happen is that the worldview we're living through now, if men can claim to be women, and that's how they identify, if I can identify as Asian, black, whatever, you name it, I can identify as anything, and people are identifying as younger than themselves, they're saying, look, I identify like a 13-year-old, so that's why I want to be in elementary school. What's wrong with somebody, or what's going to stop them from saying, hey, yeah, I know that kid is 12, but I identify as 13 and we're just in a relationship. What's wrong with that? Or what's wrong with a loving relationship between a grown-ass man or woman and a child? Nothing really wrong. I mean, love is love, right? And I know some of you are saying, oh, no, that's not going to happen. I mean, I'm a believer of the LGBTQ. I'm a supporter of trans rights, of all of this stuff. It can never get to that point. Really? If you have lived in the last, let's say you've been around, let's say you're 30, 40 years old. If I had asked you even 3, 4, 5 years ago, would men be participating in women's sports? Would men be allowed in locker rooms? Would men would people be chopping off their genitals? Would they be doing all of this? Would this be happening? Would we have queer time, drag queen story hour? Would we be doing all of this insanity and ousting people that quite honestly are confused on an elevated platform and giving them celebrity status? You'd say, no, how could that be? Well, that's the time we're living in. And how did we get there? Slippery slope. Every little transitional step. So when I say to you that pedophilia, that's again, minor attracted persons, will be normalized, of course it will. Because honestly, what's wrong with that? That's how that person feels. It makes them feel good to be with somebody younger. You want an example of this? Look up Jeffrey Marsh. Now, for those of you who don't know who he is, he's a 45-year-old man and he's an internet celebrity of some form or other. I don't know how he identifies, trans, pan, whatever the hell it is, but he regularly targets in his video, his content is targeted at kids. That's right, young people. And he will say things like, your parents screwed up. That's right, your parents don't know who you are. They don't understand you. And he has a Patreon, and what he wants to do with young people through that account is connect with them privately so they can share all kinds of wonderful things. Maybe he wants to share the theory of E equals MC2 squared that, what Einstein came up. I'm sure he wants to do very methodical, thoughtful things, right? He probably just wants to unpack what's happening in Ukraine and Russia with these kids. That's probably what he's after. No, back in the old days, a decade or so ago, we used to call people who targeted children predators and pedophiles. And we used to have them excluded from society, essentially, in the sense that they were being closely watched, closely monitored. They weren't celebrated. We didn't celebrate diddling kids. We didn't celebrate messing up kids. We were on guard for people like this. And now the doors of schools that are being flung open to welcome people such as this. Back in the old days, they were locked out and barred. They weren't allowed entry anywhere. but now that's okay. Really? So I've come to the place where for me, there is no middle ground. I can't see eye to eye with crazy people anymore. There is nothing that you can do to negotiate with these people, because the moment you start seceding ground to them, you've lost. You could say, well, hey, you know what? You can't trans kids at 5. You can trans them at 8. Well, why can't I trans them at 7? Why can't I trans them at 6? Or you can only trans adults. Well, then why can't I trans kids? I mean, the moment you give ground to these people, the moment you give any ground to any insane ideology, I mean, you could take it with climate, or you could take it with, well, look what we lived through with the COVID. 14, 15 days to flatten the curve. The moment you gave ground to these people, you've lost. That's it. Because they're not interested in finding a middle ground with you. For them, it's all or nothing. It's their ideology that must reign supreme, and yours must be crushed. And your tolerance, your kindness, your humanity, your compassion is what's going to hurt you, because these people will weaponize that and use it against you. Don't believe me? Look around. Everything that, I'm sure even the people that were moderate, they used to say, well, okay, you know what? You do you live it, you live out your life and you're not bothering or hurting anyone. Did you honestly think we would get to a point where we would celebrate messing up kids royally, screwing them up mentally, physically, every other freaking form? You can have a child trans at 7 or 8 or re-identify themselves, but they can't drive. They can't freaking buy a lottery ticket. They can't smoke because they don't know any better, but this they know. Are you freaking serious? That's what happens when you submit to that. You give an inch. There's just no inches to give, folks. Again, look up Jeffrey Marsh. Don't believe me. Don't believe how this can permeate to that point. Check out people like him. Look at what's happening when people are coming against drag queen story time hour, when people are opposing these sorts of things. They're being vilified as the people that are in the wrong because they're not loving, they're not caring. I don't see how screwing an 11-year-old boy is very loving. I don't know. Maybe you do. Anyway, I welcome your comments. I appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so. You can follow me on my Rumble and my Locals account. As always, I welcome your comments. You know what, folks? We are in a war. And in a war, it's either you're on defense or you're offense. And we have been on defense a long time. And it's freaking time we got on offense, because defense ain't working. Anyway, I'll see you next time.